Welcome back. This is my world. I'm back where I was after the last video. I've taken all of my assets and I put the material on the assets and they're all ready to go. I want to talk in this video a little bit about the importance of making sure that the modular assets that you have made snap together as cleanly as possible and that you are as accurate in placing objects next to one another as possible. This is mainly because there is an issue when you're dealing with a 3D program, whether it be a 3D modeling program like Max or Maya, or whether it's a game engine like Unreal or Unity, that objects are only one-sided. There is no inside to them. So when I create a series of objects, assets, say like this little piece that I have right here, I'll drop that out there. If I go in and I look inside of it, because I can go inside of it, there's nothing there. There's only an outside surface on this thing. There is no inside surface. Now, when I'm trying to take objects and butt them up against one another, we have something in 3D programs called Z-fighting. And the Z-fighting is I have two objects here that only have outside surfaces. There is no inside surface. Unreal, or any other game engine, or any 3D program for that matter, can only display one object in a given space at any time. These two pieces, if I take and I overlap them, you start to see what we call Z-fighting. And the Z-fighting here is what happens when Unreal is trying to display two things in exactly the same space. So what it does is it cycles back and forth between them and gives me this vibration. Sometimes you'll see it as like diagonal lines will appear in things. And if I get close enough to there, maybe you can see kind of what's going on there. But you get this strange pattern going on. And this is a fairly obvious example of it. But usually what happens is we take objects and we slightly overlap them a little bit because we're not really paying attention or using the snap tools. And then, from far away, you can't necessarily see that. From back here, that looks probably okay. There's a little bit of vibration still going on, but it looks pretty good. So as I'm moving around and assembling my world, when I zoom in or when I actually go in to play the game, all of a sudden I have this Z-fighting going on that can become really annoying and really visible, especially if you're in first person, although you can see it there from all angles on that thing. It's vibrating. All right. And then there's another interesting thing that happens when you have Z-fighting. And that is, if you were, say this was two pieces of wall. You have two wall sections going on here. And I'm building an environment. I'm putting a building into the environment. And I'm going to have something like a particle system for rain or for snow. If my two wall pieces were this far apart, the rain and snow particles would get between them. And if this was supposed to be two fairly thin walls and I was standing in an environment, in a room, and I expected to have the materials of the particle systems would stay out of the building, they wouldn't actually come through it, so you couldn't see rain inside of a room, for example. What happens is rain particles will squeeze between openings, whether it's like this or whether it's just a slight opening. Particle systems the particles will find their way down through them. The particles are blocked by objects, but that's a gap, and it's going to come down through the gap. Well, an interesting side note on this is when you have Z-fighting like this, the two systems, the two collision boxes, cancel each other out right here. So what happens is there is no collision right where those two objects are overlapping. It's a strange phenomenon that happens. But so what you'll do is you'll build an environment. You'll have overlapping buildings. You'll put particle systems in there for atmosphere, for sky, for snow, or for rain, or for some sort of a particle system, a dust storm or clouds or something like that you want swirling around outside. All of a sudden it's coming indoors, and you can't figure out why it's coming indoors. It's because you have two objects that either are not touching perfectly or they're overlapping with the dreaded Z-fighting and then the disappearance of a collision wherever those two objects are disappearing. So when we're assembling an environment, the ability to put pieces exactly up against one another is critical. Now, theoretically, when these are modeled in a 3D program, they are made on a certain scale or a certain grid, and the pieces are made to go directly from a 3D program into a 3D game engine. And you can bring them in, and they snap together pretty well. But most of the objects that you're going to get, if you're going to go and download things off of TurboSquid or something like that, you have no idea what grid system, what the settings were used to whether or not they match Unreal. So you bring them in and you think, okay, I've got these two pieces, I want to butt them up against one another, and you get really close and you go, my God, they're overlapping. What am I supposed to do? These things are still overlapping a little bit. All right, so let's talk about the snap tools and how we can fix that so we can avoid those types of problems. That's obviously too far apart. That's obviously overlapping, and yet that's how the pieces are snapping together. Okay, so let's look at the snap tools up here. The top of the screen, these are our position grid snap values. So this first one right here is open the editor surface snapping option. So if you do that, you can pick kind of the way that you want to do it. If you click on this one, that is turning it off or turning it on. If you see the yellow or the orange around that, that means that the grid is turned on. And this is the value that we are using. And if you click and hold on it, click and let go right there, what you'll get is you'll see the grid that allows you to set how these things are going to come together. Now, ideally, the grid system that was used in 3D program was set to 10. If it's set to 10, that means that all the pieces are modeled on basically a scale of 10. And when you bring them in here, they'll match up with the snap tools perfectly. But these models weren't done that way. I did them specifically and changed the grid on them when I made these. So when you brought them in, you would have to learn how to use the snap tools. So a setting of 10, if I grab that and pull it 10, it's going to move it 10 units. And that's a big overlap. You can see there's really a huge overlap. So what are you supposed to do? You really don't ever want to turn it off. Never turn your snap tools off. Once it's turned off and then you forget about it, now you start moving things around on a piece-by-piece basis, and now you start running into problems. What I find the best way to do this is if you're trying to do the snap tool, set it to 1 and test out to see how close you can get a snap of 1. Now it's still snapping. That's overlapping. That's not overlapping. And it looks like if I set it to 1, those two pieces are pretty much dead on. There's not really any kind of a gap running between them. If you want to make sure, if you want to really check to make sure that those pieces are butted up against one another, then you can go in here and maybe go to the top view. And if you look down here at the top view, I can look down at these two objects. There are kind of a lot of other things in the way. But what we're seeing is this is one object up here, and this is the other object down here, looking down from the top. And those are pretty much sitting in exactly the same spot. So they are butting right up against one another, which is just exactly what I want. So let's go back to perspective here. Okay. And once I got that one set, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to set that maybe back to 10 for right now. And then what I'll do is I'll pull this thing, hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to drag a copy over, and we'll see if I can butt it right up against one another. It looks like these pieces are always going to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that back down to 1, and then I'm going to pull it apart until they butt right up against one another again. And I think I'm just going to leave that on 1 for right now. Generally, I do leave it on 10, maybe 5 at a minimum, and do that. Now, excuse the jump on the screen there, but I went to check something really quickly just to make sure that this is going to work in this program. I know it used to be in here. I wanted to make sure that it was still in here. When you are trying to take objects and put them all together, ideally, like I said earlier, they're modeled in a 3D program in such a way that they can snap together because they're all on the same grid. But we come into here, and our grid settings are different, like I said. I'm not really sure what I think they were set to 16 in the 3D program that I built these in Max, and we're set to 10 in here. But sometimes it can be really difficult when you have to lower this thing down to 1 because you're still not quite sure whether or not that an object is really, maybe it's instead of it being a 1 unit setting between them. It's set in such a way that it actually overlaps by maybe a half a percentage or something like that. You're still going to get that Z fighting going on, or it's a little teeny tiny gap that you really can't see. It's really difficult to go in and see. The program's just too difficult to look at it like that. So they do have the feature still in here, which is a great one to look for, and that is a snap to vertex. Now, I know this exists in a 3D program. I use it all the time. When I'm modeling things, I snap them together using a snap to vertex. Remember, an object is made up of a series of vertices. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then one way in the back is 8. There's 8 vertices that make up the corner points on this object. Okay, when you want to bring things in and you want to make sure that they snap together perfectly, what you can do is you can go up to Settings, and you can go down here, down near the bottom, it says Enable Vertex Snapping. Now, there are 3 of them down here. Actually, there's 4 of them. Enable Actor Snapping. We can do that in terms of the distance. We can get it as close as we want. We can do Socket Snapping. A socket you're going to talk about when we get into the skeletal mesh characters. A socket is where a weapon is going to be. You create a socket in a hand bone, and then a gun or some sort of a device is attached to that socket. Not to the bone, it's attached to the socket. So we can snap things to that. That's going to make it easier for you to put a weapon in somebody's hand. Enable vertex snapping, which I have checked now, and that is going to be the corner here vertex is going to snap to that corner vertex. Or you can do enable planar snapping. And sometimes this might be a good thing for you too. Also, planar is going to be this surface. Now, this surface is one big polygon, but it's planar. That means it's facing on an X or a Y or a Z angle. So this is facing on the Z, this is facing on the Y, and then this one over here is facing on the X. So what I can do is I can say, if I click on Enable Planar Mapping down here, what it would do is it would then take and say, this is a planar face. It's on the x-axis. This one over here has a planar face. It is also on the x-axis. And it'll take those two and it'll just snap them right together. Okay, now, if you don't believe me that that's actually doing, let me turn off the snap. And I'll pull this thing away. And then I'll click on that one again. And I'll bring it up here. And it's going to snap right to that surface. You can actually see it snap. It just kind of jumps around as it's doing things, but it's butting up against each one of those. It's fitting into all of them perfectly. So I can do that all the way. Now I'm going to turn the planar off. I tend to just stick with the vertex snapping. That really kind of works the best when you're trying to bring things in and put them together. So remember, you're going to have to be really close on this one to make sure that you get everything as good as possible when we're putting these things together. All right, now, the best thing to do, I think, in a situation like this, when you're faced with all of these things, is you're now going to build an environment of your choice. So what I like to do when I'm going to start out building an environment is to start with the obvious. And the obvious in this particular case is a doorway. So I'm just going to drag a doorway out here, and I'm just going to let it go. Now, in terms of the snap to the ground on this one, the way that the world is set up, this is 0, 0, 0. It has a certain amount of height, but it's basically the height on this one is measured from the top down. So this is sitting where it needs to be. When you bring in an asset, it will snap to the ground plane. In fact, it'll snap to whatever you bring it into. If I bring this into a ground plane, you can see it snaps right down to the ground. If I come over to this and bring it up here, it'll snap to the top of that door. Okay, or I can bring it out there and kind of let it go. But I want to bring that in and set it right there. These are the elements that make up the door. Now, the problem that we have here is the doorway. That might actually be okay. The doorway, you should be able to take that and snap it right up against there. And you get a little bit of an overhang here in the front, which is good. That's kind of what you want. And I've got a doorway. All right. Now, if you look at all of these pieces, what you'll see that there is an elemental theme going on. So, for example, this is called the ground trim, this piece right here. If I bring it out and drop it in, you'll notice it actually looks like like the design on the wall right there. So it looks like this piece and this piece are a continuation of one another. So I think what I'll do, it might be a little bit thicker, which is kind of good because it's usually a little bit thicker. And let's take that and butt that right up against that doorway, like that. So I have a little bit of a recessed door going on. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I would like to put in maybe a short brick wall, like this piece right here. All right. So that's the brick wall piece that I would like to bring in. Now with the vertex snap, it functions pretty well, but you can see it's just kind of bouncing around a little bit. There might be an easier way to do this one, because that's not doing kind of what we need here. I'm going to switch to unlit so I don't have the problem with the shadow here on the back side of this thing. There we go. Okay, that snapped right up against it. But an easy way to do this, when you're trying to build something, and you've got a piece that you know you want to go up on top, there's an easy way to do that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to take this one and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and I'm going to drag up a copy. So I've got it here, it's lined up, it's all ready to go. But I don't want that piece. Well, Unreal allows you to go in and replace one piece with any other piece that you want to replace it with. So I can come in here and I can say, well, I want to replace it with that wall right there. This is the piece down here that I would like to use as a replacement for it. I think I'm going to put that one there, and then I'm going to put this other brick piece on top of that to finish out my little brick wall, and we'll see how it goes from there. So I've duplicated that thing and I've pulled it up. Now with it selected down over here, I can now right click on that object, and I have these two things down here. One says place actor, okay, and the other one says replace actor. I don't want to place an actor there because I've already got one. What I want to do is I want to replace that piece there with this one right here. And when I do that, it brings it in and it is still lined up and it's all ready to go. Made that a little bit easier. Now I can select both of those pieces. If you hold down the Control key, you can select on multiple pieces. Then I'll hold the Alt key and I'll do this. And now you'll see part of the problem that you have, why it works really well, but you kind of have to do some additional things as well, is that it's snapping to vertex. So what it's doing is it's like jumping around. It wants to snap it this way. And if I rotate it around, it's not going to snap the way I want it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up here really quickly and I'm going to turn off that vertex snapping, and I'm going to bring in this thing on the one setting. It looks like that's overlapping just a little bit, so we'll pull that up. If it's doing it here, you know it's doing it there. You just want to make sure you can't actually see through. You would be able to see all the way through to the other side, so that's actually doing pretty good. All right. Now, I've talked about the Z-fighting and why you always want to avoid Z-fighting. How are you supposed to make adjustments to the size of something when you're dealing with modular pieces? My modular walls, these two brick pieces that are down here in the lower left, are both the same width. The difference is this one is basically much higher. But they're identical except for that. They're the same width, but one's higher. But what if you need less wall than this? What if I was trying to make this conform to some sort of a pre-designed structure? I just have like a basic outline of what a building looks like. And this unit, or these three things together, the two walls and the two doors, are just too wide. I need something narrower than that. But what am I supposed to do? What you don't want to do is you don't want to come in here and start scaling things. And the reason that you don't want to come in here and start scaling things is because that model is made and textured with everything to match. If I go in and say, let's shrink that up, you can see what happens to the texture. Okay, the texture is going to shrink up, and it's going to distort that particular object compared to the other objects in the scene. And I can't do the same thing if it's too tall. I can't go, well, let's shorten that thing down like this, because now I've got some bricks that are this size and some bricks that look like that. So what is it that we do when we actually need to control the width, that we actually have a situation where I've got a thickness on this wall, and but I need something that's a little bit narrower? How can I do that? Especially since I can't go in and say, well, let's do this. Let's take these two pieces, and I'm going to make that wall just a little bit wider, so let me just do this. Okay, now I've got a wall that's a little bit wider, but you got Z-fighting over 90% of that thing, and it just looks awful. So I can't even do that. So what is it that I'm supposed to do? Well, one of the things that we do is we cleverly design these buildings, these pieces, with basically an accordion effect. And by an accordion effect, I'm going to bring this column out over here, and I'm going to set it right there. The accordion effect, what it does is it allows me to treat an architectural feature like this column, okay, like an accordion, which expands and contracts as you take it and push it and pull it. Well, I can take that column and I can completely overlap that wall like this. All right. Now you might say, well, you just got through talking about Z-fighting. Well, why am I not getting Z-fighting on that? Okay. Or I can take this and I can pull it down and say, look, I only want this thing to be as tall as that wall right there. Why don't I just take it and make it maybe just a little bit taller? But I'm just going to shrink it down kind of like this. So now I've got a wall that's kind of like that has this nice architectural feature to it. Why am I not getting Z-fighting? Well, I'm not getting Z-fighting because no two surfaces are taking up the same spot. Okay? That is actually overlapping this object. And if I took it and I looked at it, let's get this around a little bit like this, and we'll look at it in wireframe. All right, there's my one wall, and then it's sitting completely inside of that column. So what happens there in a situation like this is you have no Z-fighting because the surface of this one is not matching the surface there. The surface on the top is not trying to match that surface. The only thing I have to be afraid of or careful about is not having that wall butt up against the outside surface of that column, because if I do that, what I'm going to get is I'm going to get Z-fighting over here on the end. So what I can do is I can actually use this to shorten up wall segments. Now, you know, strictly speaking, what I've got going here is it's still just as wide, if not wider than it was. Okay, but what I can do is, and I can take and make something where I'll take this and I'm going to push that back a little bit. If I take this piece over here and butt it up against that piece right there, all right. Let's say turn that thing off. There must be a shortcut key for that, but I'll find it. They go, well, okay, here's what I need to do. I need to have an end of a building, and it has a certain width, and I've got this situation going on. That's too wide, and the two pieces here are too narrow. These pieces are too narrow. I need something wider than that. Well, this is where these things come in. I can take that, and I can do that here. I can also make a copy of it, and I can basically make this wall up to the width of this and the width of that wider. I could actually butt this wall right here up against that column. I could actually take this one and I can shrink it up a little bit by overlapping that wall about like this. So I don't really have that Z-fighting going on, and I'm able to create something that takes up the correct width. It's as wide as I need it to be, and yet I've got a really nice overall look going on. I can also take these and I can pull these down a little bit, maybe get that concrete down to the ground like that. And again, I'm not going to get any Z-fighting if that's overlapping the ground. So I got that concrete down on the ground, so that kind of makes a sense with what's going on. And then I also have other pieces. I've got some other columns here, like there is a column cap in here that I can bring in. I'm pretty sure that that's the one that I want. And so what I can do is I can pull these pieces up. Yeah. Do that over here, I guess. Like this. And they're both selected, so what I'll do is I'll select that piece over there, I'll right click, and let's replace them with those. And so now I've got that little end cap is put on there, and architecturally I've got this nice little piece going on. Nice. And then what I can also do is I can take that piece, and this one, and this one, and this one, and then I can do the same basic thing. I can take and create a little piece that comes over that way. Take that, that, and that, and we'll do the same thing. And they're overlapping one another in there. You know, if this piece overlaps that piece in here, and it's overlapping, I can't see the Z-fighting because the Z-fighting is actually behind or inside that column. So it doesn't really matter. It actually gives me a nice feel for what it is that I'm trying to do. So I can create some really nice architectural features, and I could always, you know, if it bothered me, I could always grab that and copy it and put it in here like this. And I have a nice little spread of columns. Obviously, we'd make the ground plane here would be bigger. And I have that going on. So I can take these pieces and I can line them up and I can do a variety of things with them and snap them all together. Now the windows, the way that the windows are going to work on this one are going to be pretty much the same way that we add in this column in here. If the windows and this piece right here are the same width, so let's take these two pieces right here and I'm going to bring a copy of them forward. And let's maybe rotate that 90 degrees. And we'll push it back. And I'll kind of get it up against. Like that. And I'll go back up now real fast. To butt those things up against one another, I'm going to do the snapping so it comes right up against it. All right. And then we'll take this piece, and we will turn that off again, and copy columns over here like that. All right, no, let's say I want to replace these with windows. So what I can do is I can select that wall, I can come in here, and I've got 3 of these windows to choose from. They're all the same size. If I click on one, and then right-click and say replace, it will replace it with that one. I can take this one, click on this window, right-click, and replace it like that. And the only thing that I have to be careful of when I'm doing that is you need to make sure that you do have the casing for the window showing up. You can see over here, I can see the concrete on this side of the window. I can see the concrete on that side of the window. I've got the concrete over here on this one. I don't have it over there, which means these two objects over here are going to have to get moved out a little bit, just so I have the ability to complete that thing like that. So that's basically how we bring these things in and we snap them together and we make them all work. Remember, you've got your snap tools up here. You want to make sure that you keep those on. If you're not sure of the grid setting, use the closest one, maybe 5, to move something around and see how it overlaps, and then zoom in really close and then switch to 1. But don't turn your snap off. And remember, you also have the ability over here to turn on enable vertex snapping or enable planar snapping to make sure 2 objects butt up against one another absolutely perfectly to avoid z-fighting or to have little teeny tiny gaps between your objects, and you should be okay. Now, if I go in and test this out and look at it, it looks pretty good. They have collision on them. I can see reflections in the windows. I got collisions on the walls. The texture looks good. The texture height, or the object height, is actually set pretty good. They seem to be about the perfect size for the things I'm going to do. And it is all geared off of the door. So if I run around back over here and look at that door is sized perfectly for the player. So if that door were to open, which we're going to handle next week when we start dealing with blueprints, and the ability to open up a door, to walk up and trigger it so it opens up. The door is set to the perfect size. So these are the shapes. These are the objects I'm going to be using. All of the assets I'm going to be using from here on in are going to come from this package. You're going to be able to construct a fairly nice environment of your choice. You got enough pieces down there to construct pretty much any type of environment that you want, including right down to the air conditioning unit and some signs. If you wanted to post some signs on the wall, you can put the signs in the scene as well. But basically, I'm looking to go in and build some sort of a plausible, cohesive architectural space.